By now, you've seen the headlines of Pete Hegseth's spiritual advisor and pastor calling for the death of James Talarico. And James Talarico has responded in a very Christ-like way, saying that I love you more than you could ever hate me, etc. You can read it in this post. And the Christian nationalists are responding to this with a verse in Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So in essence, they are saying that they're praying for a figurative death of James Talarico. They're praying that James Talarico gets saved because they live in a delusional world where James Talarico is not saved. Are they calling for the same exact thing of Donald Trump, right? Are they praying for Donald Trump to be crucified with Christ in a figurative sense? Are they praying for Donald Trump's salvation? Are they praying for their own, is my question, because the things that they're supporting and defending, right? I question what they're following and who they are praying to, because it's not Jesus of the Gospels. If you've ever heard James Talarico speak, he is speaking directly from the teachings of Christ. There is no way to misinterpret James Talarico, okay? Christian nationalists do not like anyone that is a progressive Christian or anyone even quoting the teachings of Christ. And I find that really bizarre at this point, because we have to continuously point out that this is unacceptable. And it is absolutely unacceptable for the spiritual advisor of the Defense Secretary of the United States to call for any kind of death of a politician, whether or not it's figurative or literal, okay? This is America, where we have freedom from religion, and separation of church and state does exist. It is our constitutional right. And this type of violent language, whether or not they want to mask it and be delusional and think that they're saved and we're not, and demonize James Talarico, it's absolutely ridiculous. It is against our Constitution. And we don't have to sit here and stand for it. We don't have to accept Christian nationalists demonize us because we don't belong to their cult. We don't belong to their religious political cult. And that's what it is. Because if they want to demonize someone like James Talarico, where I have listened to a lot of speeches from James Talarico, the fact that they think he's not saved cracks me up, okay? Because I've heard the same stuff in my life. Oh, I question your salvation, you know? Who do they think they are? Maybe they need to die to self. Where's the humility in them? Where's the humility in saying someone else is not saved? Maybe they need to follow their own advice. It would seem. The way that Christian nationalists are demonizing James Talarico should make us all very sick in our stomachs and in our souls, okay? Because the popular narrative going on in white evangelicalism, conservative Christianity, Christian nationalism, that whole group, right? The narrative is that James Talarico is not saved. And they're saying this basically because the teachings of Jesus makes them so uncomfortable that, oh, James Talarico must be a demon. There's the bleeding heart liberal, you know, they're a demon or they're not saved. And what's really bizarre to me is that the good people that we think belong to these institutions don't see right through this, right? They're swallowing the propaganda. They're not looking into James Talarico. They're not listening to James Talarico and comparing what he says with the exact words of Christ. And it's just further evidence that the teachings of Christ have become a moot point in that religious system. They do not like the words of Christ. They don't like the words of Christ because the words of Christ challenges their political ideology. It challenges them in their soul, because if you actually hear the teachings of Christ and really take it seriously, there is no way you could be a part of the reality that they're a part of. There's no way they could have the worldview and stick in it the way that they have. There's just no way. It's not congruent. So as much as we want to be done with religion and we don't want to come on and talk about it and we don't want to be in the fight, there has to be a counterpoint here, because really dark figures are taking the teachings of Christ, they are basically throwing them in the trash and calling them demonic. That's what's going on right now. That's what's going on. Demonization of James Talarico serves many purposes for the cult. But one main purpose that it's serving is to make an example out of James Talarico, basically telling the other congregants, hey, if you start talking like him, we're going to smear you, because essentially that institution is a narcissistic institution, and they are engaging in a narcissist smear campaign by smearing James Talarico and making an example out of him. He's wearing the scarlet letter. Do you want to wear it too? Because we'll hang you up, if you start quoting the teachings of Christ. And those of us that have left this institution, we've already dealt with our various smear campaigns, since we were children maybe, if we started talking about empathy or started talking about being compassionate, it was always, oh, well, you have a watered down gospel. And the other day, someone left a comment on one of my videos saying that James Talarico is the fallacy of progressive Christianity, okay? The fallacy of progressive Christianity, meaning that they do not want the teachings of Christ spoken. They don't want it. They call it watered down. They call it lukewarm. They call it a fallacy. How about the fallacy of your cult? That's bullshit. Right? How about that fallacy? Okay, because I could go on and on and on about how this institution is a complete fallacy and has nothing to do with Christ and has everything to do with control, fear, and manipulation. I want to highlight this because this is so true, and this gives insight as to why they are so against James Talarico right now, and why he's in the media, and they're calling him a snake, and they're calling him a demon, and they're calling him misguided and unsaved, and they do not like the Sermon on the Mount quoted because they don't want to challenge their own political ideology that is self-serving, and it's very individualistic. It does not help the community. It does not help the world, right? They want to be able to be comfortable in their churches with not challenging the system. They want to continue to be able to support predatory capitalism and exploiting people and exploiting the earth's resources. And so Jesus's words confront all of that. Jesus's words confront conservative ideology. And so they're not really upset at James Talarico. They really don't like Jesus and anything that he said because they don't take it seriously. They don't want to love their enemies. They don't want to love trans people. They don't want to love women who are in bad situations. It's so obvious what's going on here. And the powers that be, years ago, centuries ago, have manipulated Christianity to what it is now, which is unrecognizable, to the point where the words of Jesus makes the system shake.